I never imagined I'd be standing on my expansive balcony, watching my ex-husband and his brother argue in what was once my dream home. My name is Olivia Taylor, and at 34, I've learned that life has a way of teaching you who you really are when everything you've built gets taken away. 5 years ago, James and I found the perfect lot in Oakwood Estates. We'd spent months driving through neighborhoods, imagining our future, sketching ideas on napkins over Sunday brunch. As an architect, designing our home was more than a project. It was the physical manifestation of our love story, every corner and window placement deliberate and meaningful. We'd talk for hours about the southern exposure for the kitchen, where I'd grow herbs year-round, the reading nook with built-in bookshelves where we'd eventually read bedtime stories to our children, the wraparound porch where we'd grow old together, watching fireflies in summer. I poured my heart into those blueprints, incorporating elements that represented both our pasts and our shared future. The day we broke ground, James handed me a silver trowel engraved with "Building Dreams Together" and promised this would be the first of many milestones we'd celebrate in our forever home. I still have that trowel, though now it symbolizes something entirely different. When James transferred our house deed to his brother behind my back, claiming family comes first, he couldn't have known that his betrayal would unleash something in me I didn't realize existed, a determination that would transform not just our property line, but the entire trajectory of my life. Sometimes the deepest wounds create the strongest foundations, and as I stand here now, looking down at what I once thought was everything I wanted, I realize that losing your dream can sometimes lead you to build something far more magnificent. This is the story of how I lost my house but found my power, and why I now know that the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living larger. James and I met at an architectural conference in Chicago, where I was presenting my thesis on sustainable urban living. He caught my attention during the Q&A, asking the most insightful question about integrating historical preservation with modern, eco-friendly innovations. Later, at the networking mixer, he approached with 2 glasses of wine and a confidence that was magnetic without being arrogant. "Your presentation changed how I think about adaptive reuse," he said. And for the next 3 hours, we talked like we'd known each other for years. By the time we exchanged numbers, I already knew this was different from other first meetings. Our relationship progressed with the precision of a well-drafted blueprint. Weekend trips exploring architectural landmarks, long conversations about our design philosophies, and a shared vision of eventually creating our own home together. For 3 years, we lived in a cramped downtown apartment, saving every extra dollar toward our dream. I was building my reputation at a prestigious architecture firm, while James worked as a financial advisor, specializing in real estate investments. The irony isn't lost on me now. My career took an unexpected turn when I was selected to lead the redesign of the city's waterfront district, a project that earned industry recognition and came with a substantial bonus that finally put our savings over the threshold we needed. Every weekend for months, we drove through neighborhoods, evaluating school districts, commute times, and the intangible feel of different communities. When we found the lot in Oakwood Estates, I literally gasped. Old-growth oak trees framing a natural slope with perfect southern exposure, a small stream at the rear of the property, and enough space to create privacy without isolation. James squeezed my hand and said, "This is it, isn't it?" And I could already see our home taking shape in my mind. Designing the house became my passion project. I'd stay up late into the night, tweaking floor plans, researching materials, creating 3D models that we'd walk through virtually before making final decisions. Every feature was intentional. A chef's kitchen with a 6-burner gas range because James loved cooking Sunday dinners. A home office with built-in drafting table overlooking the garden where I could work on freelance projects, wide hallways, and 0-step entries in case our parents needed to move in someday. When construction was finally complete, we hosted a housewarming dinner for our closest friends and family. That's when I first met Daniel, James's younger brother, and his wife, Rebecca. Something about Daniel immediately put me on edge. Perhaps the way his eyes cataloged every feature of our home with an appraising look rather than appreciation, or how his compliments carried a subtle undertone I couldn't quite place. Rebecca seemed lovely, though, genuinely admiring the custom built-ins and asking thoughtful questions about the design process. During dinner, Daniel mentioned his recent promotion at an investment firm, speaking confidently about risk assessments and market projections. James beamed with obvious pride in his brother's success, toasting his accomplishments with expensive champagne. Looking back, I should have noticed the slight tensing in Rebecca's shoulders when Daniel described their plans to upgrade to a larger home. But at the time, I was floating in the happiness of finally being in our dream home. That first year was everything we'd hoped for. Morning coffee on the east-facing porch, dinner parties where James would proudly give tours highlighting my design work, planting the garden we'd planned during those apartment years, and falling. Asleep in a master bedroom with the perfect view of the moon through strategically placed windows. My design business grew steadily as I established a home office and began taking select clients, creating custom spaces that reflected their lives the way our home reflected ours. I thought we were building something unshakable, brick by brick, day by day. I couldn't have known that the foundation had already started to crack. The call came just after midnight, the harsh ringtone jolting us both awake. James fumbled for his phone in the dark, his expression shifting from confusion to concern as Daniel's voice carried faintly through the speaker. I caught fragments. Complete. Disaster. Could lose everything. Need help. Before James stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. When he returned 30 minutes later, his face was grim. Daniel's been let go, he explained, settling heavily on the edge of the bed. Made some investment decisions his firm didn't approve of. I expressed sympathy, of course, and asked what we could do to help. He needs to bridge some gaps until he finds a new position, James said vaguely. I told him we'd help. It wasn't until I was reviewing our joint accounts 2 weeks later that I discovered what help meant. A $10,000 transfer to Daniel's account. I waited until dinner, placing the bank statement between us before serving the lasagna. Were you planning to tell me about this? I asked, keeping my voice even despite the betrayal coursing through me. James looked genuinely confused by my reaction. It's just a loan until he's back on his feet. He's family, Liv. Our first real argument erupted like a sudden summer storm, intense and disorienting. It's not about the money, I tried to explain. It's about making major financial decisions without even talking to me. James's response still echoes in my mind during sleepless nights. Family always comes first, Olivia. I didn't think I needed permission to help my brother. Something fundamental shifted that night, a hairline fracture in our foundation. I tried to repair it by offering to help Daniel with his job search, leveraging my professional connections in various industries. I spent hours updating his resume, connecting him with a recruiter friend, even arranging an informational interview with a commercial real estate developer looking for someone with financial experience. Daniel nodded along during our coffee meeting, but his eyes held a dismissive glaze that suggested he was merely humoring his brother's wife. When I mentioned potential positions that might require a step down in title or salary, he cut me off mid-sentence. I'm not interested in starting over, he said with an edge to his voice. I have certain standards. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Rebecca began appearing at our dinner table with increasing frequency. What started as weekly check-ins became almost nightly occurrences, Rebecca offering to help with dishes, while Daniel pulled James into his study for brother talks that often lasted hours. Weekends that James and I had once spent on home improvement projects or exploring, hiking trails now revolved around helping Daniel network or revise job applications. Once, returning early from a client meeting, I overheard them arguing in James's office. Daniel's voice tight with frustration, James's responses soothing but firm. The conversation halted abruptly when I called out a greeting from the entryway. During a rare moment alone with James, I gently suggested that Daniel might benefit from financial counseling, perhaps restructuring his debt while searching for the right position. James's reaction startled me, a flash of defensiveness immediately followed by a patronizing smile. Daniel doesn't need advice on managing money, Liv. This is temporary. You don't understand the pressure he's under to provide for Rebecca. That night, James made reservations at the upscale Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated our engagement, ordering champagne and reminiscing about our early days. But even as we clinked glasses and shared tiramisu, I felt a new distance between Us, as though the evening were a performance we were both participating in, rather than a genuine reconnection. As we drove home, James reached for my hand across the console. "Thank you for understanding about Daniel," he said. "It means everything that you're supportive." I squeezed his hand and smiled, but inside, a quiet voice was whispering that I hadn't actually agreed to anything, and that somehow, without my noticing, the parameters of our marriage were being rewritten. 6 months passed, with Daniel still between opportunities, as he'd taken to describing his employment status at family gatherings. Each interview that didn't result in an offer seemed to have a different explanation. The company wasn't innovative enough. The compensation package was insulting. The corporate culture wouldn't value his expertise. Meanwhile, Rebecca had started reaching out to me separately, suggesting lunch dates where she'd pick at her salad while dropping hints about their deteriorating financial situation. "We've had to cut back on everything," she confided during one such lunch, twisting her wedding ring anxiously. "Daniel's applying for forbearance on student loans, and we're 3 months behind on the mortgage." I expressed genuine concern, offering to help them create a budget that might ease some pressure. "That would only upset him," she said quickly. "He says things will turn around any day now." I came home from that lunch to discover another unexplained withdrawal from our joint savings account, $25,000 this time. I waited until James returned from his golf game with Daniel, my anger simmering just below the surface. "I thought we agreed to discuss major financial decisions," I said, showing him the transaction record. James's response knocked the wind from me. "My brother needs help, and frankly, Olivia, you seem to forget that I'm the primary breadwinner here. Your architecture projects are nice, but let's be realistic about who built this house." The dismissal of my financial contributions, I'd contributed nearly 60% to our down payment from my waterfront project bonus, and consistently matched his income since, left me speechless. Later that week, searching for our insurance documents to file a claim for a minor fender bender, I found unfamiliar bank statements in James's desk drawer, an account I didn't recognize at a different bank, with regular transfers dating back several months. I didn't confront him immediately, watching instead for other signs of secrecy. They weren't hard to find once I started paying attention. James stepping outside to take calls, changing his email password, having hushed conversations with Daniel that abruptly shifted to sports or weather when I entered the room. Most concerning was James's new habit of meeting with Daniel and their parents without including me, family discussions from which I was deliberately excluded. The situation escalated when Daniel showed up at our door one Tuesday evening with 3 suitcases and a sheepish explanation about their landlord selling their rental property unexpectedly. "It's just for a couple weeks until we find a new place," James assured me, already carrying his brother's luggage to our guest room. Those weeks stretched into 3, with Daniel and Rebecca establishing an uncomfortable semi-permanence in our home. More disturbing was James's changing attitude toward the house itself. The passion projects he'd once enthusiastically tackled each weekend now elicited only disinterest. When I suggested repainting the dining room, he shrugged and said, "Why bother? It's fine as is." Our second major fight erupted when I found Rebecca rearranging my carefully organized kitchen cabinets. "We thought it would be more efficient this way," she explained, not meeting my eyes. When I expressed to James that while I sympathized with their situation, certain boundaries needed to be respected, his response chilled me. "They're going through a rough time, Liv. Can't you be more accommodating? This is their home too right now." James slept in the guest room for a week after that conversation, displacing Daniel to the sofa, creating an awkward dynamic where I became the villain in my own home. Thanksgiving arrived with James inviting his entire extended family without consulting me. I spent 3 days cooking and cleaning, only to watch as James's mother directed dinner conversation exclusively toward Daniel's job prospects and Rebecca's patient support during this challenging time. No one asked about my recent commission to design a local community center or acknowledged the elaborate meal I'd prepared. When James's father raised a toast to family pulling together in hard times, the pointed look he sent my way made it clear which family member was considered lacking in team spirit. As the holiday season progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated in rooms full of people. Friends began noticing the strain, with my college roommate Kate directly asking if everything was okay after observing James and me at her Christmas party. "You two seem disconnected," she said gently. "Is there something going on?" That conversation led me to research marriage counselors, carefully selecting one whose approach emphasized communication and mutual respect. When I suggested attending together, James's reaction was immediate and definitive. "We don't need some stranger telling us how to fix problems we don't have. This is just a stressful time with Daniel's situation." I went to the first session, alone, sitting awkwardly in a waiting room decorated with calming landscapes, feeling like I was betraying James merely by being there. Dr. Hendricks listened attentively as I described the shifting dynamics in our marriage, the growing sense that my voice carried less weight than Daniel's needs. "What do you want from your relationship?" she asked toward the end of our session. The question seemed so simple, yet I realized I'd stopped considering my own wants entirely, focused instead on managing James's reactions and accommodating his family's expectations. I never scheduled a second appointment, telling myself things would improve once Daniel found employment and our home returned to normal. I couldn't have known then that normal had already been fundamentally redefined, without my input or consent. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, addressed to Daniel Taylor but delivered to our mailbox. I almost added it to the growing stack of his mail on the entry table without a second thought, but the return address caught my attention. County Tax. Assessor's Office, with our property address referenced in the corner. Curious and increasingly uneasy, I examined the envelope more closely, noticing Property Tax Statement, printed beneath the official seal. Why would Daniel be receiving tax documents for our home? I set the envelope aside in my home office, the question nagging at me throughout my workday. That evening, I casually mentioned receiving tax mail for Daniel, watching James's expression carefully. His momentary flash of alarm, quickly masked with practiced nonchalance, confirmed my growing suspicion that something significant was being hidden from me. "I'll make sure he gets it," James said, reaching for the envelope I hadn't actually brought to dinner. Property taxes are complicated this year with his situation. The vague explanation only heightened my concern. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, waiting until James and Daniel had both left before driving downtown to the county records office. The clerk was efficiently helpful, typing our address into the system, while I held my breath. "Here we go," she said, turning the monitor slightly so I could see. "Property transferred from James and Olivia Taylor to Daniel Taylor, recorded 3 months ago. Would you like me to print the deed transfer for you?" I nodded, unable to speak, as the document that shattered my world emerged from the printer. My hands trembled as I examined the paperwork. There was my signature, or rather, what appeared to be my signature on a legal document I had never seen, transferring full ownership of our home to Daniel. The date aligned perfectly with the mysterious bank account I'd discovered, the increasing secrecy, the changing attitude toward our home. Somehow, I managed to drive home, the world around me surreal and distorted through the lens of betrayal. I placed the document on the kitchen island and waited, moving through afternoon tasks with mechanical precision. When James walked through the door at 6:17, his customary greeting died on his lips as he spotted the papers. "You weren't supposed to find out this way," he said finally, confirming my worst fears without a trace of remorse in his voice. "I was going to tell you once things were settled." The explanation he offered as we stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, the marble countertop I'd selected after weeks of research, now a physical manifestation of the divide between us, made me question whether I'd ever truly known him at all. Daniel had faced mounting pressure from bankruptcy proceedings following failed investments. To protect their family assets from creditors, James had transferred our home to Daniel's name, using a separate account to continue making mortgage payments. "It's completely legal and temporary," he insisted, as though legality were the primary concern. "Once Daniel gets back on his feet, he'll transfer everything back to us." When I asked about my signature, James had the audacity to look offended. "I knew you'd overreact like this. It was easier to handle the paperwork myself than deal with unnecessary drama." The casual admission of forgery, the dismissal of my reaction as drama, the unilateral decision about our home, Each revelation was a seismic shock to the foundation of our marriage. "We still live here," James continued, his tone suggesting I was being unreasonable. "Nothing has changed day to day." That's when the final piece fell into place. Daniel and Rebecca's extended stay, their gradual rearrangement of our space, the strange comments about future renovations. "They're moving in permanently, aren't they?" I asked, already knowing the answer. James's hesitation was confirmation enough. "It makes financial sense," he eventually explained. "They can't afford rent while Daniel job searches, and this place has more space than we need anyway. We'll all save money." The magnitude of the betrayal rendered me momentarily speechless. Not only had James given away our home without my knowledge or consent, but he'd planned for us to become tenants in what was legally now his brother's house. As the implications sank in, I realized my name was no longer on any ownership documents of the home I'd designed, the space that held all my dreams and professional pride. "We can work out a rental agreement with Daniel that's favorable to everyone," James suggested, seemingly oblivious to the devastation written across my face. "Think of it as helping family through a difficult time." That phrase, "helping family," suddenly took on a sinister meaning, illuminating with perfect clarity that despite our marriage, I had never truly been considered family. I was an outsider whose needs and feelings were expendable when weighed against blood ties. In that moment, standing in the kitchen I'd designed down to the last cabinet pull, I felt the ground shift beneath me, not in the way it had when we'd found the perfect lot 5 years earlier, but in the sickening lurch of realizing your entire reality has been a carefully constructed illusion. I packed a suitcase that night with mechanical efficiency, selecting essentials while James followed me from room to room, his tone shifting between defensive justification and incredulous disbelief at my overreaction. "It's just a house, Olivia," he said, as I carefully folded the quilt my grandmother had made for our wedding. "We still live here. Nothing has changed except some paperwork." His complete failure to understand the magnitude of his betrayal, the forgery, the secretive planning, with Daniel, the fundamental disrespect for our partnership, only confirmed I was making the right decision. When I carried my suitcase to the door, reality seemed to finally penetrate James's confident assumption that I would eventually accept his decision. "Where are you going? You can't be serious about leaving over this." I turned to look at him, one last time in the entryway of what had once been our dream home. "This isn't about a house, James. This is about trust, respect, and whether we're actually partners or just two people sharing space until something more important comes along. Apparently, I have my answer." I checked into a downtown apartment complex that offered month-to-month leases, a sterile, impersonal space with generic furnishings and blank walls that felt appropriately transitional for the limbo I now occupied. James called repeatedly during that first week, his messages evolving from defensive, "You're being completely unreasonable," to conciliatory, "Let's just talk this through," to manipulative, "Daniel and Rebecca are worried about you." I let each call go to voicemail, needing space to process the seismic shift in my reality. When I finally returned to the house to collect more belongings, I timed my visit for when James would be at work. Instead, I encountered Daniel and Rebecca in the master bedroom, our bedroom, measuring walls and discussing furniture placement. "The armoire won't fit in this corner without blocking the view," Rebecca was saying, gesturing toward the custom window I designed specifically to frame the old oak tree in the backyard. They both froze when they noticed me standing in the doorway, Rebecca's face flushing with what appeared to be genuine embarrassment, while Daniel adopted a defensive posture reminiscent of his brother. "Olivia, we didn't expect you," he said, attempting authoritative casualness in a room where I'd selected every paint color and light fixture. "James said you'd moved out." The surreal experience of being treated as an intruder in my own carefully designed space crystallized something for me. This displacement had been planned long before the deed transfer, possibly from the moment Daniel had lost his job. I collected my remaining clothes and personal items under their uncomfortable supervision, noting with detached interest that some of my decorative pieces had already been replaced with Rebecca's family photos. I agreed to meet James at a neutral coffee shop the following day, selecting a publicly busy time to prevent any scene. He arrived with a manila folder of documents and a practiced expression of reasonable conciliation. "I've been thinking about ways to make this transition smoother," he began, sliding papers across the table. "Daniel's drafted a rental agreement that's extremely generous. Below market rate, guaranteed tenancy for at least 5 years. I left the documents untouched between us. "You still don't understand, do you? I'm not upset about living arrangements or rental terms. You made unilateral decisions about our home, forged my signature on legal documents, and planned this entire situation with Daniel behind my back. Our marriage isn't a partnership to you. It's a hierarchy where your family's needs automatically supersede mine." James's response, delivered with patronizing patience, became the moment clarity crystallized completely for me. "Family makes sacrifices for each other, Olivia. Sometimes I think your problem is that you didn't grow up with siblings, so you don't understand how this works." In that instant, I recognized that the fundamental values gap between us was unbridgeable. We weren't arguing about a house. We were revealing irreconcilable differences in how we defined partnership, trust, and respect. During the drive back to my temporary apartment, doubt crept in. Was I overreacting to material possessions? Was my attachment to the house clouding my judgment about our marriage? I spent that evening researching therapists, eventually scheduling an appointment with Dr. Leanne Martinez, whose specialization in betrayal trauma resonated with my situation. During our first session, Dr. Martinez listened without judgment as I recounted the progression from dream home to nightmare scenario. "I keep wondering if I'm being materialistic," I admitted. "It's just a house after all." Her response provided the external validation I'd been unable to give myself. "This isn't about the physical structure. It's about the violation of trust, the deliberate deceit, and the disregard for your agency in major life decisions. The house is symbolic of the partnership that was betrayed." Over the next few weeks, I established financial independence, opening separate accounts and transferring my portion of our joint savings, actions that prompted increasingly desperate calls from James. Our final conversation occurred 6 weeks after I'd left, with James still insisting I was throwing away our marriage over a temporary arrangement. When I explained again that the issue was trust, not property, he countered with, "I was protecting our financial future from Daniel's creditors. You should be thanking me for being proactive." That night marked my emotional rock bottom. Curled in an unfamiliar bathtub in a generic apartment, sobbing until my throat was raw, questioning every moment of our 5-year relationship. Had there been signs I'd missed? Was I a fool for believing we'd been building something genuine together? I fell asleep exhausted from grief, surrounded by damp tissues and shattered illusions. But when morning came, something had shifted. A quiet spark of determination had ignited during the dark night, a recognition that while I couldn't control James's actions or choices, I could absolutely decide what happened next in my own story. 2 weeks later, driving past our old neighborhood to meet a client, I noticed something I'd missed during previous detours to avoid painful memories: a for sale sign on the vacant lot directly adjacent to what had once been our property. I pulled over, studying the undeveloped land with growing interest. It was actually larger than our lot, with the same beautiful old oak trees and natural slope that had originally captured our attention. What began as a fleeting fantasy, buying the property out of spite, crystallized into serious consideration as I jotted down the realtor's contact information. That evening, I spread property documents across my apartment's dining table, researching recent sales in the neighborhood, zoning regulations, and building codes. The lot was zoned for single-family residential use with generous allowances for square footage and height restrictions. More importantly, its elevation was slightly higher than our former property, offering potential for strategic design elements that would be visible from next door. The following morning, I scheduled meetings with 3 different banks to discuss financing options as a single woman with excellent credit but newly complicated financial history. The loan officer at Austin Community Bank, a woman in her 50s, who listened with unexpected empathy to my abbreviated explanation, became an unexpected ally. Divorce isn't finalized yet, but you're financially independent with strong income history, she noted, reviewing my documentation. We can structure a construction loan based on your individual qualifications. I accessed my separate savings account and made arrangements to borrow against my 401k for the substantial down payment, calculated risks that felt simultaneously terrifying and empowering. With preliminary financing secured, I leveraged professional connections for after-hours consultations, calling in favors from structural engineers and sustainable design specialists I'd collaborated with throughout my career. Night after night, I sat at my drafting table sketching initial designs for what was evolving from revenge fantasy to architectural statement. Working within zoning restrictions but pushing creative boundaries, I designed a 3-story modern masterpiece with strategic sightlines deliberately oriented toward my former home. The clear story windows of the great room would catch morning light and be visible from Daniel's new master bedroom. The expansive third-floor balcony would offer panoramic views, including an unavoidable perspective of the smaller house next door. Every feature James had vetoed in our original designs now featured prominently. The Japanese soaking tub, professional-grade kitchen with double islands, glass-enclosed home office with mountain views, separate wings for work and living spaces. I created a vision board filled with architectural elements that represented not compromise, but pure self-expression. Each selection reflecting aspects of myself I'd subtly suppressed during our marriage. My former mentor and architecture professor, Sophia Mendes, agreed to collaborate on refining the innovative design, bringing her expertise in sustainable building and dramatic use of natural light. "This isn't just a house, Olivia," she observed during one late-night design session. "This is your manifesto." With Sophia's guidance, I created a comprehensive proposal, including detailed cost calculations and financing framework. The numbers were daunting but achievable if I leveraged every resource available: savings, retirement funds, potential design contracts I could complete during construction, and a carefully structured loan package. When I presented my financial plan to Margori at Austin Community Bank, she reviewed the documentation with professional thoroughness before looking up with unexpected approval. "It's aggressive but sound," she concluded. "Your credit score and professional reputation carry significant weight." The day I signed the purchase agreement for the lot represented the most terrifying and empowering moment since leaving James. Initialing each page with my own name only, committing to a vision that existed solely in my imagination, and detailed blueprints. Standing on the empty lot afterward, I closed my eyes and visualized the home that would rise from this raw space, feeling for the first time since the betrayal a genuine sense of possibility rather than loss. The initial contractor meetings brought their own challenges. Several male builders subtly questioned whether a woman's project would have sufficient funding or clear direction. Their condescension evaporated when I presented meticulously detailed architectural plans and demonstrated comprehensive knowledge of building materials and structural requirements. Eventually, I connected with Westlake Construction, a female-owned company whose project manager, Elena Diaz, immediately grasped both the technical and emotional dimensions of what I was building. "We specialize in bringing architectural visions to life," she said, reviewing my blueprints with professional appreciation, "and occasionally making statements in the process." The supplier negotiations, permit applications, and timeline projections consumed my evenings and weekends, but the intensive work provided unexpected healing. In creating something new, I was reclaiming parts of myself that had become entangled in James's betrayal. Each decision made independently, each problem solved through my own expertise, restored confidence that had been undermined during those final months of marriage. The preliminary soil testing and property survey confirmed the lot's viability for my ambitious design, though several specialized structural elements would require additional engineering consultations. Rather than feeling overwhelmed by these complications, I found myself energized by the creative problem-solving required, staying awake until 3 a.m. sketching alternative approaches that ultimately improved the overall design. When the final permit applications were submitted, expedited through professional connections who recognized the project's architectural merit, I experienced a profound shift in emotional landscape. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into productive energy focused entirely on creation rather than loss. What had begun as reaction was evolving into something far more significant, a reclamation of my professional identity and personal agency through the very medium that had initially connected me to James. The groundbreaking ceremony wasn't the public spectacle typical of commercial projects, but a private ritual attended by 5 close friends who'd supported me through the separation. We gathered at sunrise, champagne in paper cups, as I ceremonially pushed a gold-painted shovel into soil that would soon support my new foundation. "To building what comes next," Sophia toasted, her arm around my shoulders as we surveyed the marked boundaries of what would become my architectural statement. Construction began the following Monday, heavy equipment arriving at 7 a.m. sharp to begin excavation for the basement level and foundational footings. I'd arranged my client meetings to allow daily site visits, often arriving in business attire, that quickly became dust-covered as I consulted with Elena on material deliveries and structural alignments. 3 days into excavation, James drove slowly past the property, clearly shocked by the scale of activity. I pretended not to notice, his car idling at the curb, instead focusing intently on reviewing measurement calculations with the foundation contractor. The following week, Daniel filed a complaint with the neighborhood association, citing concerns about construction noise and potential property value impacts. My attorney, recommended by Dr. Martinez, who'd recognized the potential for legal complications, crafted a response that was professionally devastating in its precision, citing all relevant building permits, noise ordinance compliance documentation, and architectural renderings demonstrating the property's enhancement of neighborhood aesthetics. The pouring of the foundation, significantly larger than my previous home, marked the first major milestone, concrete trucks arriving in steady procession throughout a 12-hour day. I brought lunch for the entire crew, earning unexpected respect from veteran workers who noted my attention to structural details many homeowners overlooked. The scale of the foundation made the project's ambition visible for the first time, drawing curious neighbors who stopped to inquire about the design. "It's a personal vision," became my standard response, offering architectural highlights without revealing the emotional blueprint underlying the physical one. The framing stage transformed abstract plans into tangible reality, wooden skeletal structures rising to reveal the 3-story structure with dramatic roof lines and expansive window placements. From certain angles, the frame partially obscured views from my former home, a consequence I deliberately calculated during the design phase. James arrived unannounced one afternoon as roof trusses were being installed, approaching across the partially landscaped yard with the confident stride of someone accustomed to controlling conversations. "This seems excessive," he observed, gesturing toward the structure looming above us. "The lawyer said you're refusing mediation on the divorce." I maintained professional composure despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "My attorney has my complete instructions. This project is separate from our legal proceedings." His attempt to leverage the divorce to halt construction, claiming the property purchase had utilized marital assets despite my meticulous documentation of separate funds, was defeated by my attorney's thorough financial records and the construction loan's exclusive attachment to my independent credit. The completion of exterior framing coincided with neighborhood speculation reaching fever pitch, with several real estate agents requesting tours to evaluate comparable property values. The project had become something of a local sensation, featured in the community newsletter with carefully edited quotes from my interviews about architectural innovation rather than personal motivation. I established genuine friendships with several neighbors whose initial curiosity evolved into sincere interest in sustainable building techniques and modern architectural elements. The roof completion called for traditional celebration, though I skipped the superstitious evergreen tree sometimes placed atop new structures, instead gathering female friends for sunset champagne on the unfinished second floor, the expansive space offering perfect views of mountains to the west, and, incidentally, unobstructed perspective into what had once been my carefully designed gardens next door. Interior selections became exercises in authentic self-expression, selecting fixtures, finishes, and materials that reflected my aesthetic without compromise or consideration of another's preferences. The custom floating staircase, a sculptural element visible from the street through floor-to-ceiling windows, became the home's signature feature, its engineering complexity a testament to my professional connections and design ambition. James's approach shifted noticeably as construction progressed, his initial anger evolving into awkward reconciliation attempts, including an unexpected delivery of lilies, my favorite flowers, to the construction site with a card suggesting we talk about the future. I established firm boundaries about personal conversations, limiting interactions to necessary divorce proceedings while refusing to discuss the project or potential reconciliation. Through mutual friends, I learned that Daniel continued struggling financially despite mortgage-free living arrangements, with property taxes and maintenance costs exceeding his expectations. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house he'd acquired through manipulation was becoming a financial burden rather than the solution James had envisioned. Rather than satisfaction, I felt an unexpected compassion for Rebecca, whose quiet competence had been undermined by both brothers' financial mismanagement. The divorce finalization coincided with electrical and plumbing completion. Legal documents arrived for signature the same day I approved final placement of custom light fixtures throughout the main living spaces. Standing in the nearly completed great room, ceilings soaring 18 feet above herringbone hardwood floors, I experienced my first moment of genuine peace since discovering the betrayal 8 months earlier. The culmination of electrical work enabled installation of the architectural lighting system I designed to highlight the signature staircase, the illumination visible from the street creating dramatic nighttime presence. James called that evening, his tone suggesting he'd driven past and seen the lighting display. "Was all this really necessary, Olivia?" he asked, seeming genuinely confused. "It seems like you're trying to make some kind of statement." My response surprised even me with its lack of residual anger. "I'm not making a statement, James. I'm building a home that reflects who I am without compromise. There's a difference." The landscaping design, completed by an award-winning horticulturist, who'd become an unexpected friend during the project, strategically featured specimen trees and architectural plantings that enhanced the property's prominence while creating natural privacy screens from neighboring properties, except in very specific sightlines. Late-phase construction coincided with rumors that Daniel was considering selling the original house, the financial strain of ownership apparently exceeding his capacity despite rent-free living arrangements. The certificate of occupancy arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, the building inspector signing final approval documents with genuine compliments about construction quality and innovative design elements. After months of anticipation, the official permission to occupy my creation felt simultaneously momentous and surreal. The moving process from my temporary apartment to the completed mansion spanned a weekend, with professional movers handling furniture delivery while I personally transported architectural books, design awards, and the silver trowel James had given me at our original groundbreaking, now displayed in my home office as a reminder of lessons learned rather than promises broken. Unpacking each carefully selected item in spaces designed specifically for them brought unexpected emotional release, the physical arrangement of my possessions symbolizing the reconstruction of my identity, independent from betrayal and loss. The furniture I'd selected during construction, much of it custom-built by local artisans, fit perfectly into allocated spaces, as though the house and its contents had been conceived together as a unified expression. My home office placement had been deliberately calculated during design, positioned to overlook the original property with expansive windows and a private balcony offering unobstructed views of what had once been my garden, now somewhat neglected, under Daniel and Rebecca's stewardship. The planning of my housewarming celebration became a joyful exercise in hospitality rather than the anxious performance I'd experienced during similar events in my previous life. The guest list included supporters who'd witnessed my journey: Dr. Martinez, Sophia, Elena, and key members of the construction team, neighbors who'd become friends, clients who'd provided flexible working arrangements during the build, and the banking team that had structured my financing. Notably absent were any invitations to James's family, though I did include Rebecca in a gesture of grace that recognized her position as collateral damage in the brothers' manipulation. The completed home, now fully furnished and styled, exceeded even my ambitious vision. 3 times the size of the original house, with architectural elements visible from every approach. The 2-story glass entry revealed the dramatic floating staircase illuminated by custom lighting, while the great room's clear-story windows captured morning light that reflected across the property line. My home office, positioned strategically, with views of both mountains and the neighboring property, became command central for my expanding design business, with client meetings now held in the purpose-built conference room rather than leased commercial space. The neighborhood response to the finished mansion ranged from admiration to barely concealed envy, with several residents requesting tours to inspire their own renovation projects. I observed Daniel and Rebecca watching from their driveway as delivery trucks arrived with art pieces and custom furnishings, their expressions unreadable from a distance, but their attention unmistakable. The evening before my official housewarming party, James appeared unannounced at my front door, his expression suggesting he'd rehearsed this moment but wasn't prepared for the reality of the completed structure. "I wanted to see it before tomorrow's event," he explained awkwardly. "Everyone's talking about what you've built." Against my better judgment, I allowed him a brief tour, watching his reactions as each space revealed another level of thoughtful design and personal expression. His silence as we moved through room after room of the magnificent interior spoke volumes, his occasional questions about specific features highlighting his growing recognition of what his betrayal had ultimately cost him. In the kitchen, a chef's paradise with double islands and professional-grade appliances, he finally spoke with genuine emotion. "This is incredible, Liv. I had no idea you were capable of something at this scale." The backhanded compliment crystallized everything that had gone wrong in our relationship, his fundamental underestimation of my capabilities and vision now physically manifested in the space surrounding us. As he prepared to leave, standing in the grand entryway beneath the sculptural lighting installation that had already been featured in a regional design magazine, James suggested tentatively that perhaps now that things were settled with the house and divorce, we might consider reconciliation. My response came without anger or vindictiveness, simply clarity. "What we had can't be rebuilt, James. Trust, once broken that completely, doesn't get repaired with apologies or time. I wish you well, but that chapter of my life is closed." The housewarming celebration the following evening became an emotional milestone. 60 guests exploring the spaces I'd created, offering genuine appreciation for both technical achievements and aesthetic choices. Sophia raised a toast midway through the evening, acknowledging the journey from architectural concept to physical reality, while tactfully avoiding mention of the circumstances that had initiated the project. Rebecca's absence was noted but unsurprising. Through mutual connections, I'd learned that Daniel had declined my invitation with obvious discomfort. The most surprising revelation came from a neighbor who'd become a friend during construction, who mentioned casually that Daniel had listed the original house for sale the previous week, apparently struggling with maintenance costs and property taxes beyond his financial capacity. James had reportedly moved into an apartment across town, the brothers' relationship strained by the financial arrangement that had supposed to benefit both but ultimately damaged everyone involved. The irony of their solution, causing cascading consequences for all parties, wasn't lost on me, though it brought no satisfaction. The following weeks brought professional recognition I hadn't anticipated, a feature in Architectural Digest highlighting innovative residential design, followed by interview requests from sustainable building publications interested in the energy-efficient systems integrated throughout the structure. My client roster expanded significantly as the home became something of a showcase for my design philosophy, with several high-profile projects offered based specifically on elements observed during industry events hosted in my great room. The most unexpected development came 3 months after moving in, when James appeared at my door with an elaborate bouquet and dinner reservation at the city's most exclusive restaurant. A grand reconciliation gesture that suggested he still fundamentally misunderstood the nature of what had broken between us. My gentle but firm rejection seemed to finally penetrate his confidence that our relationship could eventually be repaired, his expression shifting from hopeful to resigned as he accepted that some choices have permanent consequences beyond what's anticipated. Standing on my third-floor balcony that evening, looking down at the property I'd once considered the physical manifestation of love and partnership, I realized the view no longer triggered pain or anger, just a quiet recognition of how completely both the physical and emotional landscapes had transformed through my own deliberate actions. 6 months after moving into my new home, I awoke to morning light streaming through carefully positioned windows, illuminating a life reconstructed entirely on my own terms. My home office had evolved into headquarters for a thriving design business, with 3 junior architects now working from the converted carriage house I'd added during final construction phases. The mansion had been featured in architectural magazines and included in local design tours, my professional reputation enhanced by the innovative solutions demonstrated throughout the property. The journey from devastation to empowerment hadn't proceeded in a neat, linear progression. There were still occasional moments when grief would surface unexpectedly, triggered by memories or milestone dates. But those episodes diminished in both frequency and intensity as new experiences accumulated. The most unexpected development during this period was my evolving relationship with Rebecca, who contacted me shortly after her separation from Daniel, seeking both professional advice about returning to her abandoned teaching career and personal support during her own rebuilding process. Our coffee meetings evolved into genuine friendship founded on shared experience with the Taylor brothers' manipulative tendencies, though we tacitly avoided detailed discussions of either relationship. Through Rebecca, I learned that the original dream house had indeed been sold to cover Daniel's accumulated debts, with James relocating to Chicago for a fresh start with a different financial firm. The information registered as neutral fact, rather than emotionally significant news, confirming my healing progress was substantial and genuine. My weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez had transitioned from crisis management to growth-focused discussions about establishing healthy boundaries in all relationships and recognizing early warning signs of incompatible values. The house was ultimately just a catalyst, she observed during a particularly insightful session. The real construction project was rebuilding your understanding of your own worth and capabilities. Processing emotions properly through continued therapy enabled me to reach a place of forgiveness without reconciliation, recognizing that while James's actions reflected profound character flaws and misplaced priorities, maintaining anger only limited my own forward progress. The capacity for trust that had been shattered during the betrayal slowly regenerated through new relationships established on transparent foundations. Though I approached romantic connections with appropriate caution and clearer expectations. Setting healthy boundaries became second nature across all areas of life: professional collaborations, family obligations, social commitments, with the physical boundaries of my property serving as tangible reminder of the importance of clearly delineated personal limits. An unexpected outlet for my experience emerged when I began mentoring other women navigating similar betrayals, informal coffee conversations that evolved into structured workshops about financial independence and rebuilding after relationship dissolution. These sessions eventually led to establishing a foundation, providing architectural services and financial guidance for women transitioning from destabilizing life situations, with quarterly fundraising events hosted in my great room becoming highlights of the local social calendar. Family holidays, once dominated by James's relatives and their established traditions, transformed into celebrations reflecting my authentic preferences and values. Thanksgiving dinner now featured friends from diverse backgrounds, contributing signature dishes from their cultural traditions, while Christmas evolved into a week-long open house where people could connect briefly or linger for deeper conversations, depending on their comfort level. The most profound realization occurred exactly 1 year after discovery of the deed transfer, when I drove past the original house and felt nothing beyond aesthetic appreciation for certain design elements I'd incorporate differently in future projects. The property that had once represented everything I valued had become simply another house, meaningful only as the catalyst that had ultimately led to greater self-discovery and authentic expression. The lessons about resilience and self-worth transformed every aspect of my professional approach, from client interactions to design philosophy, with a new emphasis on creating spaces that evolved with inhabitants rather than constraining their growth. The freedom of making decisions solely based on my own needs, preferences, and values remained the most valuable outcome of the painful journey. Each choice, from paint colors to client selection, representing an affirmation of my reclaimed agency and independent vision. On the anniversary of moving into the mansion, I hosted a small dinner party on the expansive balcony overlooking the city, surrounding myself with friends who'd witnessed both my devastation and reconstruction. As sunset painted the sky in spectacular oranges and purples, I raised a toast that encapsulated the journey's ultimate lesson: to building the life you want, rather than accepting the limitations others impose. Looking out over twinkling city, lights from the home I'd created entirely through my own vision and determination, I felt a profound peace that transcended the circumstances that had initiated this chapter. The painful loss of what I'd thought I wanted had ultimately led to gaining what I truly needed. Not just a more impressive structure, but the unshakable knowledge that I possessed everything necessary to create solid foundations, regardless of what storms might come. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to something better in your life? Something that felt devastating in the moment, but pushed you to build something stronger? I'd love to hear your stories of resilience and rebuilding in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more. Reflections on overcoming life's unexpected challenges and building something beautiful from difficult beginnings. Thank you for sharing this journey with me today. May you always find the strength to redesign your life when the original blueprints no longer serve you. I never planned to become the owner of one of Manhattan's top investment firms at 38, but life has a strange way of delivering justice when you least expect it. My name is Morgan Chen, and tonight I'm standing in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, champagne flute in hand, watching the city's financial elite network in their finest attire. The charity gala's crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over everyone, making even the sharks look angelic. That's when I spot him across the room, Blake Thompson, impeccably dressed in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my first car, moving through the crowd with that confident smile I once admired. 7 years ago, he was my boss at Thompson and Associates, the man I thought would mentor me to greatness in the financial world. Instead, he became the architect of my most humiliating professional moment, the day he interrupted my presentation to our biggest potential client and announced to a room full of executives that I was too emotional to invest because women simply can't handle market volatility. The memory still burns like acid, even as I stand here as CEO of Sterling Chen Investment Partners, the firm that just completed its acquisition of Thompson & Associates last month. I watch Blake's expression change as our eyes meet across the room. His smile falters. Uncertainty flashes across his face. He hesitates before making his way toward me, straightening his bow tie nervously. "Morgan," he says with forced warmth, extending his hand. "Remarkable event tonight. You've done exceptionally well for yourself." His eyes dart quickly to my name badge with its CEO designation, then back to my face. "I always knew you had potential." The audacity of his revisionist history would be comical if it weren't so insulting. Then comes the question that confirms everything. "I've been looking at some emerging tech stocks. Perhaps we could grab coffee sometime? I'd love to hear your thoughts." 7 years after declaring me too emotionally unstable to understand market trends, Blake Thompson is asking me for stock tips. How did I go from being the woman he publicly humiliated to becoming his boss? That's a story about more than finance. It's about perseverance, strategic thinking, and the satisfaction of success that comes not from revenge, but from creating something better than what broke you. My journey into the world of finance began long before I ever set foot in the gleaming offices of Thompson & Associates. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Philadelphia, I watched my parents struggle with the financial anxiety that came with owning a small family restaurant. My father managed the kitchen and front of house with boundless energy, while my mother meticulously tracked every penny in oversized ledgers spread across our dining table late into the night. During the recession of the early 90s, I witnessed their whispered conversations about making payroll, the constant juggling of bills, and the stress that wore them down like water over stone. One night, finding my mother crying over a pile of invoices, I promised myself I would understand the mysterious force that wielded such power over our lives, money, markets, and the mathematics of security. That promise turned into an obsession, with numbers that carried me through my economics degree at Penn and later to an MBA at Columbia, where I graduated with honors despite working part-time to minimize student loans. The job search that followed was my first real encounter with the subtle gender barriers in finance. I remember one interviewer asking if I planned to have children anytime soon, while another suggested I might be more comfortable in client relations rather than direct investment strategy. When Thomson & Associates finally offered me a junior analyst position on their emerging markets team, I felt like I'd won the lottery. Blake Thompson had a Harvard MBA, 20 years of celebrated experience, and a reputation for identifying market trends before competitors could spot them. Tall, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and custom suits, he exuded confidence that bordered on arrogance, but seemed earned given his track record. My first day at Thomson & Associates remains vivid in my memory: the marble lobby, the hushed reverence of the trading floor, the wall of financial screens, and the palpable energy of money in motion. I was assigned a desk in an open area with 5 other junior analysts, all men. The casual sports analogies, the invitations to happy hours that somehow never included me, the assumption that I wouldn't understand technical aspects of derivatives, all signaled that I had entered a world not designed for women. Instead of confronting these barriers directly, I adopted a strategy of outworking everyone else. My morning routine became almost monastic up at 4:30, market research until 6, at my desk by 7 to prepare for the 8:30 briefing. Lunch was eaten at my desk while reviewing reports, and evenings were spent developing models, until the cleaning crew arrived. The small victories came gradually: a senior analyst asking my opinion on an emerging market trend, a client praising my detailed analysis, Blake stopping by my desk to review my work with what seemed like genuine interest. "You have good analytical skills, Morgan," he told me one evening, as we reviewed a particularly complex market projection. "Keep this up, and you'll go far here." I remember the warm glow of validation, the belief that meritocracy would indeed prevail if I just worked hard enough. How naive I was then, believing that excellence would be recognized regardless of gender, that the playing field would eventually level itself if I just proved my worth through impeccable analysis and tireless dedication. I couldn't see that I was playing a game with rules specifically designed to ensure I would never win, no matter how brilliantly I performed. That realization would come later, after I'd poured years of my life into a system that was calibrated to extract my best work while ensuring the credit and advancement would flow elsewhere. The renewable energy sector wasn't on most investment analysts' radar in 2015, but through countless hours of research, I had identified a pattern that signaled major growth potential. This wasn't just a hunch, but a data-driven thesis supported by shifting political winds, technological breakthroughs in solar efficiency, and declining production costs that promised to cross the crucial profitability threshold within 18 months. I spent weekends interviewing industry experts, creating complex projection models, and tracking legislative changes across states that would impact adoption rates. When I finally had enough evidence to support my investment thesis, I scheduled a meeting with Blake to present my findings. He leaned back in his ergonomic chair, fingers steepled, nodding as I walked him through the data. "This is excellent work, Morgan," he said when I finished, genuinely impressed. "I think you should present this to the partners at next week's strategy meeting." This was unprecedented. A junior analyst rarely got to present directly to the partnership, and never on a contrarian market position. I spent the next week preparing obsessively, anticipating every possible question, refining my slides, and practicing my delivery until I could present the complex material conversationally. The partners' boardroom was intimidating with its dark oak panels and walls displaying diplomas from elite universities and photos of partners with former presidents and Federal Reserve chairs. 9 men in bespoke suits sat around the massive table, and I was acutely aware of being the only woman in the room. The presentation started well, with nods of approval as I walked through the market fundamentals. 20 minutes in, I noticed Blake's demeanor shift. As I explained how certain solar technology companies were poised for significant valuation increases, he leaned forward with a slight frown. "Interesting theory, Morgan," he interrupted, "but perhaps your outlook is a bit too optimistic. The energy sector has historically favored incremental rather than revolutionary change." Before I could respond with the historical data that contradicted this assertion, another partner jumped in. "Blake's right. The timeline you're suggesting seems aggressive." Suddenly, the room's energy changed as partners began questioning aspects of my analysis that they had seemed to accept minutes earlier. I maintained my composure, backing every point with data, but Blake continued to undermine my presentation with subtle comments about emotional attachment to emerging technologies and the need for cooler heads in energy investment. After the meeting, Blake pulled me aside. "Good effort, Morgan," he said with a patronizing smile. "This is why these presentations are such valuable learning experiences. You need more seasoning in this industry before making these kinds of calls." I later learned the firm had decided to make only a minimal investment in renewable energy companies despite all my research. 6 months later, my projections proved accurate as the sector experienced exactly the growth pattern I had predicted. During a client presentation, I heard Blake explaining the firm's strategic position in renewable energy, taking credit for recognizing the trend early. There was no acknowledgement that I had identified the opportunity, no recognition that my analysis had been correct. I spent that night staring at my apartment ceiling, wondering what I could have done differently, whether more data or better presentation skills would have made the difference. This was my first concrete confrontation with the reality that excellence might not be enough to overcome certain barriers. When I raised the issue during my annual review, suggesting that my correct market call should be considered for advancement, HR advised me to be patient and work on softer communication skills. The message was becoming clear, but I wasn't ready to accept it yet. Instead, I doubled down on my work ethic, convinced that if I just produced exceptional results consistently enough, the recognition would eventually come. This cycle of hope, effort, disappointment, and renewed determination would become a painfully familiar pattern in the years that followed. Over the next 18 months, I began to recognize a disturbing pattern in Blake's behavior toward me. He would initially encourage my research initiatives, even seem impressed by my analytical approaches. But when it came time to present findings to clients or partners, he would systematically undermine my credibility. In morning briefings, I noticed how my market observations would be met with minimal response, only to be enthusiastically received when restated by male colleagues minutes later. Project assignments revealed another aspect of the pattern. I would conduct extensive research on sectors, develop investment theses, and prepare client materials, only to be told at the last minute that clients would respond better to presentations by more senior team members who were invariably male. Blake's feedback became a masterclass in contradiction. "You need to be more assertive in meetings, Morgan," he would advise after a client briefing. Yet when I spoke up more forcefully the following week, the criticism shifted. Clients respond better to a more measured approach. Perhaps tone it down. It was during this period that I found an unexpected ally in Eliza Kaplan, a senior analyst who had joined from a competitor 6 months earlier. We began meeting for coffee before work, comparing experiences. "It's not just you," she confirmed during one of our dawn sessions at the cafe around the corner from the office. Blake did the same thing to Sarah Dennison before she left for Goldman. He cultivates talented women, uses their work, then edges them out before they can advance. Together, we developed systems to document these incidents. I created spreadsheets tracking whose ideas were implemented versus credited, time allocated to different team members during client meetings, and disparities in how similar behaviors were labeled across gender lines. I also began building strategic alliances with more supportive male colleagues, finding those who would acknowledge my contributions in meetings or back up my positions during debates. The professional challenges began consuming every aspect of my life. Friends stopped inviting me to social events after too many last-minute cancellations. My apartment became little more than a place to sleep and change clothes. My physical health deteriorated, insomnia became chronic, stress manifested as persistent headaches, and I lost 15 pounds without trying. Coffee replaced actual meals, most days. Through it all, I clung to small victories that kept me going. A client specifically requesting my analysis on Asian markets, positive feedback from a partner other than Blake, recognition in an industry publication for a research piece I'd authored. But even these moments were often diminished by Blake, either by taking partial credit or dismissing them as beginner's luck or the result of the team's guidance. My growing awareness of systematic gender bias collided with my determination to overcome it through sheer excellence and persistence. This internal conflict reached a breaking point during the quarterly investment committee meeting when Blake presented my comprehensive analysis of the automotive sector as his own work. The 20-page report with my distinctive analytical framework appeared with his name as primary author and mine buried among contributing analysts. When I raised this privately with him afterward, his response was chilling in its casualness. The committee responds better to senior authorship. This way your work actually gets implemented. Isn't that what matters more than credit? Another incident followed soon after when my name was completely removed from a market commentary piece published to clients that contained entire paragraphs I had written verbatim. Eliza confirmed this wasn't isolated. There were 3 women before you in similar roles, she told me over emergency martinis that evening. All left within 2 years despite strong performance. All were respected analysts who somehow couldn't quite meet expectations according to their final reviews. For the first time, I seriously considered whether this environment would ever allow me to succeed regardless of performance. The isolation intensified as Blake subtly spread the narrative that I was difficult after I began more assertively advocating for recognition of my work. His mentorship took on an increasingly condescending tone. I'm really trying to help you fit in, Morgan. This industry has certain expectations about team dynamics. The emotional toll became nearly unbearable. Each morning required an exhausting pep talk just to walk through the office doors. Each night ended with reviewing research to ensure I remained unassailable on the technical front while strategizing how to navigate the hostile interpersonal environment without compromising my professional standards. What made it all so insidious was the contrast between my measurable performance metrics, which consistently ranked in the top quartile of analysts, and the subjective evaluations that somehow always found reasons to delay advancement. All while watching male colleagues with demonstrably inferior analytical skills and work ethic progress steadily up the ranks, their occasional mistakes forgiven as growth opportunities rather than fundamental deficiencies. The tech sector disruption analysis was the most comprehensive work I'd done at Thompson & Associates, representing 3 months of intensive research into how emerging cloud computing platforms would transform traditional IT spending patterns. I had developed an innovative methodology combining quantitative market data with qualitative assessments from industry insiders, creating predictive models that identified specific companies positioned to either capitalize on or be decimated by the shift. The supporting evidence was irrefutable trend lines from early adopters, cost-benefit analyses across company sizes, and implementation timelines that showed clear inflection points for market disruption. When I presented the preliminary findings to Blake, his reaction seemed uncharacteristically positive. "This is excellent work, Morgan," he said, actually looking impressed as he flipped through my detailed projections. "We have the Wisconsin State Pension Fund executives coming next week to discuss investment strategies. This analysis could be exactly what we need to show them our forward-thinking approach." This was potentially career-changing. The Wisconsin Fund managed over $50 billion and was known for favoring innovative investment approaches. Their business would not only bring significant management fees, but elevate the firm's prestige considerably. I spent the next week in a state of focused intensity, refining my analysis, creating compelling visuals and practicing responses to every conceivable question. The morning of the presentation, I arrived 2 hours early, triple-checked the conference, room setup, and reviewed my materials once more. The meeting room filled with senior representatives from the pension fund, Thompson Partners, and key team members. I felt confident in my crisp navy suit and the strength of my research. The presentation began well, with the pension fund CIO nodding appreciatively during my overview of market shifts. I was 20 minutes in, explaining how specific companies were positioned relative to the cloud adoption curve when Blake first interrupted. What Morgan means to say is that these transitions typically occur more gradually than raw data might suggest. He interjected smoothly, though I had said nothing of the sort. I recovered professionally, clarifying my actual position with additional supporting data, and continued the presentation. Blake's interventions became more frequent and increasingly undermining, contradicting specific points with vague generalities that sounded authoritative but lacked substantive backing. Then came the moment that would permanently alter my career trajectory. As I was explaining how our investment approach would capitalize on the sector's transformation, Blake interrupted again, this time more forcefully. "What Morgan fails to understand," he said with a patronizing smile to the clients, "is that trading requires emotional stability. Women are naturally more emotional, which makes them too emotional to invest effectively. They simply can't handle market volatility." The room fell silent. I froze, presentation pointer in hand, as his words hung in the air. Several clients shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others studied their notepads to avoid eye contact. "Let me take over from here," Blake continued smoothly, moving to the front of the room. "Morgan tends to overthink these transitions. The reality is much more straightforward." He proceeded to dismiss my careful research as unnecessarily complex, replacing my data-driven approach with broad generalizations about tech sector patterns. I remained standing to the side, professional smile frozen in place despite feeling physically ill, somehow managing to answer direct questions when clients occasionally directed them to me. After the clients hastily departed, several junior colleagues offered awkward expressions of sympathy before quickly dispersing. I made it to the women's bathroom before the tears came, locking myself in a stall until I could regain composure. That evening, I walked aimlessly through Manhattan streets for hours, replaying the humiliation while trying to process what had happened. Back in my apartment, I stared at my finance degrees hanging on the wall, wondering if I had been deluding myself all along. That night became a dark tunnel of self-doubt as I questioned everything: my abilities, my career choice, my understanding of how the professional world worked. Was I actually too emotional? Had I misread the data? Was finance truly a field where women couldn't succeed at the highest levels? The physical symptoms of trauma appeared by morning a migraine that made light painful, nausea that prevented breakfast, and hands that trembled slightly when I tried to apply makeup. I called in sick for the first time in 3 years, unable to face the office and the whispers that would inevitably follow Blake's public assessment of my fundamental inadequacy as an investment professional. When I finally returned to the office after 3 sick days, the atmosphere had noticeably shifted. Conversations stopped as I approached, colleagues avoided eye contact in the hallways, and my usual morning greeting from the administrative staff was met with pitying smiles rather than genuine warmth. Meeting invitations had mysteriously disappeared from my calendar, and email threads that would normally include me now excluded my address. Blake's fake concern was perhaps the most degrading aspect. "Are you feeling better, Morgan?" he asked loudly near the break room where others could hear. "More emotionally stable now? We all have rough patches." His smile never reached his eyes as he performed concern while embedding the narrative that my absence stemmed from emotional fragility rather than his public humiliation of me. The undermining accelerated emails went unanswered, my analysis was questioned without substantive reasons, and decisions were made without my input even on projects I had initiated. My body began manifesting the stress in increasingly alarming ways. The occasional insomnia transformed into nightly battles for even 4 hours of broken sleep. Anxiety attacks ambushed me in elevators and meeting rooms, forcing me to develop techniques to hide my rapid breathing and trembling hands. My clothes hung loosely as weight continued to drop from my already slim frame. When the firm's contracted therapist suggested I focus on work-life balance and stress management techniques rather than addressing the hostile work environment, I realized the entire system was designed to frame the problem as my inability to adapt rather than the toxic culture itself. I spent a weekend researching gender discrimination in finance, finding study after study confirming what I was experiencing. The statistics were simultaneously validating and depressing. Women in finance faced longer promotion timelines, received harsher performance reviews for identical behaviors, and left the industry at 3 times the rate of male counterparts. Coffee with Eliza revealed even more concerning patterns. Blake has a history, she confided, showing me private LinkedIn messages from 2 former female analysts who had worked under him. He identifies talented women, uses their work to advance his position, then pushes them out before they can threaten his status. You're at least the 4th I know about. Through industry contacts, I learned that Thompson & Associates had decided against implementing my tech sector recommendations, despite the convincing data. Even more frustratingly, 3 competitor firms who followed similar investment strategies were now reporting exceptional returns in precisely the market segments I had identified. My analysis connecting the firm's declining quarterly performance to these missed opportunities went uncomfortably unacknowledged when I submitted it through proper channels. For the first time since college, I began seriously questioning whether finance was the right career path for me. I researched adjacent fields, corporate strategy, management consulting, even fintech startups where my analytical skills might be valued without the entrenched gender barriers. A conversation with my former Columbia professor provided perspective, but no easy answers. The bias is real, Morgan, she acknowledged during our video call, but the question is whether you fight from within or build something new elsewhere. Both paths require tremendous resilience. Therapy sessions shifted from managing workplace stress to the deeper work of separating my self-worth from external validation. My journal entries from this period reveal the painful process of reconstructing my professional identity while processing the anger and disillusionment. My doctor delivered a stern warning during my annual physical, pointing to elevated cortisol levels and concerning blood pressure readings for someone my age. Your body is telling you something important about your environment, she said, prescribing nothing but suggesting everything with her concerned expression. The gradual shift from self-doubt to righteous anger became my unexpected salvation. After weeks of questioning my abilities, I began to see with painful clarity that my analytical skills had never been the issue. I devoured biographies of successful women who had faced similar barriers, finding pattern after pattern that mirrored my experience. The market continued to validate my original tech sector analysis when Thompson & Associates lost a significant client, specifically citing poor positioning in cloud computing transitions. An all-company email announced cost-cutting measures as quarterly performance continued to lag behind competitors, with no acknowledgement of the strategic missteps that led to this position. My research into firms with more inclusive cultures revealed a striking correlation between gender diversity in investment decisions and long-term performance. The most successful firms weren't just paying lip service to inclusion, they were systematically incorporating diverse perspectives into their investment processes and outperforming their more homogeneous competitors. The clarity that came with this research was both liberating and heartbreaking. My current environment would never allow me to succeed regardless of performance, but alternatives existed where my skills might actually be valued for their merit rather than filtered through gender preconceptions. The promotion announcement meeting became the final catalyst for my departure from Thompson & Associates. We gathered in the main conference room as Harrison Wells, a junior analyst who had joined 6 months after me, was announced as the newest associate partner. I sat perfectly still, maintaining a professional smile while internally processing that Harrison had fewer client relationships, generated less revenue, and had been responsible for a significant misread of the agricultural commodities market that had cost the firm millions just months earlier. When Blake cited Harrison's natural leadership qualities and cultural fit As justification for the promotion, I felt something shift permanently within me. After the meeting, I calmly approached Blake with a one-page summary comparing my performance metrics to Harrison's across every measurable dimension, from client satisfaction scores to investment returns. "I'm curious about the quantitative basis for this promotion decision," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. Blake barely glanced at the document before responding with a dismissive wave. "Numbers aren't everything in this business. Morgan, there's an art to client management and team leadership that can't be captured in spreadsheets." His subsequent invitation to meet privately in his office resulted in the most condescending 30 minutes of my professional life. "I've been thinking about your career path," he began, leaning back in his leather chair as though bestowing wisdom from on high. "You have strong analytical skills, but I'm not convinced the investment strategy track is right for your strengths. We have an opening in client relations that might be better suited to your people skills." When I pointed out that my investment recommendations had outperformed the firm's average by 18% over the past year, he sighed as if I'd missed an obvious point. "I'm trying to help you find your place, Morgan. Not everyone is cut out for the pressure of direct investment decisions." That evening, I began strategically planning my exit with the same methodical approach I'd apply to any complex analysis. I documented my achievements in quantifiable terms, secured reference letters from the few supportive senior colleagues, and created a detailed portfolio of my successful investment recommendations and their outcomes. My research into firms with better cultural reputations yielded a short list of potential targets, and I began carefully reaching out through my professional network. I reconnected with several clients who had valued my work, seeking their candid advice without revealing my specific intentions. Through this process, I was introduced to Rebecca Sterling, founder of a boutique investment firm focused on long-term value creation rather than quarterly performance metrics. Our first meeting at a quiet cafe near Bryant Park lasted 4 hours. Rebecca had walked away from a senior position at Goldman Sachs after experiences disturbingly similar to mine. "I got tired of watching mediocre men fail upward while exceptional women were nitpicked out of contention," she explained with refreshing candor. "So I built a firm where analytical excellence actually matters more than networking on the golf course." She shared her struggles building Sterling Investments from scratch, the initial skepticism from institutional clients, the capital raising challenges, the constant pressure to prove legitimacy in ways male-founded firms never faced. When she offered me a position as a senior investment strategist with an equity stake rather than just salary, the decision matrix in my mind suddenly simplified despite the significant initial pay cut. The next morning, I submitted my resignation letter, 2 paragraphs of professional language that gave nothing away about my true reasons for leaving. Blake's reaction swung between dismissive confidence and thinly veiled concern. "Boutique firms rarely survive market downturns," he warned, with a paternal tone that made my skin crawl. "When it doesn't work out, we might have a junior position available for you." The exit interview with HR became an exercise in professional restraint, as I methodically documented the pattern of gender discrimination without allowing emotion to color my delivery. Their defensive response, offering a modest raise and vague promises of future advancement opportunities without addressing any substantive issues, only confirmed I was making the right decision. Saying goodbye to Eliza was the only moment that threatened my composure. "You're doing what many of us wish we had the courage to do," she whispered as we hugged. "Keep in touch. I may be calling you for a job soon." My final walk through the Thompson & Associates office produced a strange cocktail of emotions: relief, anxiety, anger, and an unexpected sense of freedom. I handed in my security badge to the same receptionist who had greeted me enthusiastically on my first day 3 years earlier. The symmetry felt significant, a chapter closing definitively. That night was my first as an unemployed finance professional in nearly 4 years. The terror and liberation arrived in equal measure as I stared at my ceiling, alternating between exhilarating visions of building something better and 3 a.m. panic about financial security and career suicide. The meeting with Rebecca the next morning to finalize details provided my first glimpse of a radically different company culture. We sat at a conference table with 2 other team members, discussing investment philosophy, operational procedures, and growth strategy as equals rather than within a rigid hierarchy. When I signed the final paperwork formalizing my position and equity stake, I wasn't just accepting a new job, I was committing to a fundamental belief that excellence could actually be recognized and rewarded in an environment designed for merit, rather than maintenance of existing power structures. This wasn't just about escaping a toxic situation, but about actively creating the alternative I wished had existed when I entered the industry. My first day at Sterling Investments revealed immediately how different the culture would be. The offices were modest by Manhattan standards, occupying half a floor in a midtown building without the marble and mahogany intimidation tactics of Thompson and Associates. Rebecca introduced me to the team of 14 professionals, a diverse group in every sense: age, gender, ethnicity, and educational background. We hire for analytical excellence and collaborative mindset, Rebecca explained. Everything else is teachable. The contrast in working methods was equally striking. My first investment recommendation, a contrarian position on retail technology integration, was evaluated purely on the strength of my analysis and supporting data. The team asked challenging questions, suggested additional research angles, but there was no undermining or dismissal based on who had presented the idea. When the recommendation was approved for client portfolios, it was my analysis that went to clients with my name prominently featured. The validation of being trusted professionally after years of systematic doubt was both exhilarating and disorienting. Within 3 months, my retail tech position yielded significant returns for clients as the market recognized the value creation I had identified. Rebecca's mentorship style contrasted sharply with Blake's manipulative approach. Her feedback was direct but constructive, focused on growth rather than control. Your analysis is excellent, she told me during our first quarterly review, but consider how to make your client communications more accessible for non-finance backgrounds. No mixed messages, no shifting expectations, just clear guidance aimed at actual improvement. Building relationships with colleagues based on mutual respect and shared goals rather than competition for limited advancement slots transformed my daily experience of work. Ideas were evaluated on merit, collaboration was genuine rather than performative, and successes were celebrated collectively rather than claimed by the most senior person present. After 6 months of establishing myself at Sterling, I reached out to Eliza about joining our growing team. Her expertise in emerging markets complemented our existing strengths, and she brought several significant client relationships with her when she joined. This began a pattern of strategic recruitment, identifying talented analysts, particularly women and minorities, who were undervalued at traditional firms. We developed a distinctive investment approach that intentionally leveraged diverse perspectives. Research had consistently shown that homogeneous teams tend toward groupthink and overconfidence, while diverse teams were more likely to identify risks and opportunities others missed. We implemented structured processes to ensure all viewpoints were considered, creating investment committees with intentionally varied backgrounds and expertise. The growth metrics validated our approach. Assets under management doubled annually for 3 consecutive years. Client retention exceeded industry averages, and our investment performance consistently ranked in the top quartile for our category. The industry recognition began gradually: a nomination for Emerging Manager of the Year, positive mentions in financial press, invitations to speak at conferences previously dominated by established players. I discovered my authentic leadership style through this process: assertive without being aggressive, confident without requiring subordination, and collaborative without sacrificing accountability. We created a culture intentionally designed to be the opposite of what I had experienced at Thomson: performance-focused, but humanistic, demanding excellence while acknowledging humanity. The personal transformation paralleled our firm's growth. The chronic insomnia faded as the constant stress diminished. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, started dating again, and rediscovered hobbies outside of work. The anxiety that had been my constant companion began to recede, though certain professional situations could still trigger echoes of the past trauma. Sterling's reputation grew beyond our initial expectations. Our consistent performance during a period when many larger firms struggled attracted attention, particularly our success in identifying technological disruption opportunities, the very specialty that had been dismissed at Thomson. Former Thomson clients began reaching out, initially curious about our approach and increasingly interested in moving their accounts as our track record strengthened. Industry whispers about Thomson's growing troubles reached us through the financial grapevine declining performance, key departures, and rumors of liquidity concerns. 3 years after my departure, Financial Week published a profile titled Sterling's Rising Stars Reshape Investment Landscape, featuring Rebecca and me on the cover. The article highlighted our collaborative approach and consistent outperformance, without once mentioning our gender, an ironic victory in itself. We celebrated our 3-year anniversary as a team with a dinner where Rebecca announced my promotion to full partner, increasing my equity stake and decision-making authority. The firm had grown to 38 professionals, managing nearly $2 billion in assets, a fraction of Thomson's size, but with a reputation for excellence that attracted sophisticated clients seeking quality over quantity. We developed a mentorship program specifically targeting young women interested in finance, providing paid internships and structured development opportunities I wished had existed when I was starting out. The expansion required new office space, which we designed intentionally to facilitate collaboration while providing equal access to resources and visibility for all team members, regardless of seniority. When the market experienced a significant recession in year 4, our relatively conservative approach proved prescient. While competitors, including Thomson & Associates, scrambled to manage over-leveraged positions, we navigated the downturn with minimal disruption. Clients who had questioned our cautious stance during the bull market now appreciated the risk management that had seemed overly conservative months earlier. We emerged from the market correction stronger, with our reputation enhanced and an influx of new clients seeking stability in uncertain times. The contrast between my professional experience at Sterling and Thomson couldn't have been more stark, reinforcing my belief that the problem had never been my abilities, but rather the system designed to evaluate them. The 5-year anniversary of Sterling Investments marked a significant milestone. We had grown to manage nearly $4 billion in assets, established a reputation for analytical excellence, particularly in identifying technological disruption opportunities, and built a distinctive culture that attracted top talent from across the industry. My position as partner and chief investment officer came with industry recognition that would have seemed impossible during my Thomson days. Our performance metrics told the story that narrative couldn't capture. 15% average annual returns against benchmark averages of 9%, 97% client retention, and growth that allowed us to maintain selectivity about which investors we chose to work with. The first rumors about Thomson's serious troubles came from an institutional client who had maintained accounts with both firms. "They've lost 3 major pension funds in the last quarter," our client confided during a review meeting. Word is they're having significant liquidity issues after the tech sector corrections. My curiosity piqued. I initiated a discreet research project into Thomson's current position. The findings were sobering. Client exodus had accelerated beyond industry averages, assets under management had declined nearly 40% over 3 years, and their investment performance ranked in the bottom quartile of comparable firms. Most tellingly, they had closed their innovative technology fund, the very area I had focused on, before leaving after catastrophic losses from positions directly contrary to what I had recommended years earlier. The strategic meeting with Rebecca and our executive team about this intelligence became a turning point. "There might be an acquisition opportunity here," Rebecca noted, studying the analysis I had prepared. "Their client base and certain specialized divisions would complement our growth strategy." The suggestion triggered complex emotions. I had built a successful career beyond Thomson, achieved everything I had wanted professionally, and yet the possibility of acquiring my former firm created an undeniable symmetry. Our due diligence process revealed the extent of Thomson's mismanagement deeper than even our initial research had suggested. Years of prioritizing short-term gains over sustainable growth, combined with the exodus of analytical talent, had left the once prestigious firm vulnerable. Most revealing was the discovery that Blake's investment decisions had contributed significantly to the decline. His team had consistently positioned client portfolios contrary to market trends, particularly in technology sectors where his dismissal of disruptive forces had proved catastrophically incorrect the very positions I had advocated for years earlier. Developing the acquisition proposal required careful consideration of valuation, integration challenges, and strategic fit. We structured terms that were fair given Thomson's weakened position, but protected our investors from hidden liabilities. Our initial approach to Thomson's board was met with thinly disguised relief. Their financial position had become increasingly desperate, with several board members privately acknowledging they had waited too long to address fundamental problems with the firm's investment approach and culture. Notably, Blake was kept largely uninformed about the detailed negotiations, his influence having waned as performance declined. The negotiation process unfolded over 2 months of intense meetings, due diligence reviews, and strategic planning. We leveraged Thomson's weaknesses while maintaining professional standards and fair terms, recognizing that many of their employees were talented professionals caught in a dysfunctional system rather than architects of it. When the final agreements were signed and regulatory approvals secured, the financial press announced, "Sterling acquires Thomson in surprising market consolidation." My return to the Thomson offices as prospective owner rather than dismissed employee created an almost surreal emotional experience. Walking through the familiar marble lobby, past the trading floor where I had once been marginalized, into the executive suite, I had never been welcomed into the physical journey mirrored my professional transformation. Former colleagues displayed reactions ranging from shock to resentful acceptance to enthusiastic relief, depending largely on their position in the previous hierarchy and their treatment of me years earlier. The critical meeting with Thomson's management team, including Blake, was scheduled for 9 a.m. the Monday after public announcement. We sat on the acquirer side of the massive conference table that had once intimidated me as a junior analyst. When Blake entered, his physical reaction to seeing me leading the acquisition team was momentarily unguarded shock, disbelief, and then a rapid attempt to compose himself into professional neutrality. His desperation became apparent as he launched into an extended pitch about his essential value to the company, claiming credit for strategic positions I knew had been developed by others, emphasizing client relationships that our due diligence had already revealed were severely damaged. I maintained absolute professional demeanor throughout, neither vengeful nor accommodating, simply focused on the business parameters that would guide our integration decisions. We'll be evaluating all positions based on quantifiable performance, metrics, and cultural fit, I explained to the entire management team, making eye contact with each person, including Blake. Our approach emphasizes analytical excellence, collaborative decision-making, and long-term value creation, rather than quarterly performance theatrics. The implementation of our transition plan began immediately. We conducted thorough assessments of departments, teams, and individuals based on objective criteria. Integration challenges emerged predictably, resistance from entrenched interests, concern from middle management about structural changes, and enthusiasm from those who had been undervalued in the previous regime. My leadership through this transition remained focused on the fundamental goal building a stronger combined firm rather than settling old scores. The strategic decisions about personnel, investment approach, and organizational structure were made systematically rather than emotionally, though I'd be lying if I claimed complete objectivity was possible given my history. On the afternoon, we completed the initial phase of integration planning. I found myself alone in Blake's former office. Standing by the window overlooking Manhattan, I experienced the moment of triumph I had occasionally imagined during my darkest days at Thomson. Yet the emotion that surfaced wasn't the vindictive satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, I felt something more meaningful, the validation that comes not from revenge, but from building something demonstrably better than what had broken you. The acquisition wasn't about owning Blake's company, it was about creating an environment where excellence could actually thrive regardless of gender, background, or conformity to outdated norms. 6 months after the acquisition, the integrated firm had developed its new identity under the Sterling Chen Investment Partners banner. We implemented structural changes designed to create the meritocracy that Thomson had only pretended to. B. Performance evaluations became transparent with clear metrics. Investment decisions required diverse input before implementation, and the collaborative culture we had built at Sterling gradually transformed the remaining elements of Thomson's hierarchy. Blake's performance review became an instructive moment in the new firm's evolution. I insisted on absolute professionalism, a data-driven assessment measuring his actual contributions against objective benchmarks rather than relationships or past reputation. The results were unambiguous when separated from his self-promotion and political maneuvering. His investment performance ranked in the bottom quartile of senior managers, his client relationships had deteriorated significantly, and his teams showed the highest turnover rates in the firm. The decision about his future emerged naturally from this assessment. We offered him a position commensurate with his demonstrated abilities rather than his self-image, a specialized analyst role focusing on the market segments where he had shown genuine insight without management authority over others. The choice. Was his accept a role matching his actual skills or leave with a standard severance package? My approach remained professional rather than personal throughout this process, focused on building a healthy organization rather than settling scores. The day Blake cleaned out his corner office marked not an endpoint, but merely one milestone in building something better than what I had escaped. The mentorship program we established became a cornerstone of our culture, identifying promising analysts regardless of background and providing structured development opportunities. Eliza took on a senior leadership role overseeing talent development, implementing systems to ensure that analytical excellence would be recognized regardless of who produced it. Our inclusive culture committee addressed systematic barriers that had previously prevented talented professionals from advancing, creating accountability mechanisms to prevent the very dynamics I had experienced years earlier. The combined firm's performance after integration exceeded even our optimistic projections. Client retention stabilized at 95% once the initial transition uncertainty passed. Assets under management grew 34% year over year as our reputation for both performance and cultural excellence spread through industry networks. The Wall Street Journal published a feature on our successful integration, highlighting how our emphasis on analytical rigor and collaborative decision-making had transformed the acquired firm's performance. My professional profile continued to expand through speaking engagements at industry conferences and leadership positions in financial policy organizations. Each opportunity to shape the conversation about investment approaches or workplace culture felt like reclaiming space that had once seemed permanently closed to people like me. As I reflected on the journey from junior analyst to CEO of a major investment firm, the lessons crystallized with clarity I couldn't have possessed during the struggle itself. The resilience developed through adversity had ultimately become my greatest professional asset. The alternative perspective I brought as an outsider to traditional finance culture had allowed me to identify opportunities others missed. Most importantly, I had learned that creating your own validation is infinitely more powerful than seeking it within systems designed to withhold it. The unexpected benefits of early adversity became apparent as I developed a leadership model fundamentally different from what I had experienced. The challenges of being a woman in finance remained undeniable, but now I occupied a position with actual power to affect change rather than merely navigate barriers. The return to the charity gala where our story began completed the circle. Standing confidently among peers who now saw me as an equal, or even a leader rather than an interloper, brought a quiet satisfaction that transcended simple revenge. When Blake approached me, noticeably humbled by changed circumstances, his attempt to rebuild a relationship was as transparent as it was awkward. "I always knew you had potential, Morgan," he offered with a smile that couldn't quite disguise the desperation behind it. His request for stock tips and investment advice represented everything about the old system I had replaced: meritless hierarchy, relationships over results, style over substance. My response was neither petty nor resentful, simply boundary establishing and professional. Over the years, I had discovered the profound truth that success isn't about proving others wrong, but about creating enduring value independent of their validation. The peace that came from living authentically, rather than performing for gatekeepers' approval, had transformed not just my career, but my entire approach to life. Looking toward the future, I saw opportunities to transform the industry beyond just one firm. Our approach of valuing diverse perspectives and rigorous analysis over pedigree and politics had proven not just morally satisfying, but commercially successful. The final image that captures the journey's meaning isn't acquiring Blake's company or watching him ask for stock tips. It's the afternoon I spent mentoring a young female analyst, seeing her brilliant analysis recognized on its merits, witnessing her confidence bloom in an environment designed to nurture rather than undermine her talent. That moment reflected the true success not owning the company where I was once dismissed, but creating a world where future generations won't have to overcome what I did to claim their rightful place. Have you ever faced a situation where someone underestimated you or dismissed your abilities, only for you to prove them wrong through your success? I'd love to hear your stories of resilience and triumph in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more authentic stories about overcoming professional challenges and building success on your own terms. Remember that sometimes the best response to those who doubt you isn't convincing them they're wrong, it's building something so successful they can't ignore it. Thank you for joining me for this chapter of my story, and I wish you the strength to create your own path to success, whatever obstacles you may face.